it means a great deal to me to have so many people of faith and action from so many different traditions in the same place pursuing the same kingdom agenda. I know my last church was in Richardson. That was a long time ago. I've been here almost 20 years. It'll be 20 years this year. But in 1980, we moved back home to Richardson, and I became the senior minister at the Richardson East Church of Christ at the ripe old age of 30. And wow, those people took a gigantic leap of faith by having me back, because that's where I grew up. But when I came back, I had two really pressing agenda points I didn't really share with anybody. I just started trying to do it. One was to make our fellowship at that church thoroughly, rigorously, and in a very risk-embracing way, ecumenical. It was really clear to me, having worked in Memphis, Shreveport, and New Orleans, that God was bigger than any kind of sectarian understanding, and that there needed to be communities of God's people who reflected that reality. And so thanks to the patience and the grace of that wonderful group of people, we've pursued that, and I think with some positive outcome. The other thing was to engage the world on its terms, unconditionally. So that if I know, and these are assumptions now, right? If I know that God has embraced me, clearly God's done it unconditionally. Clearly God has acted out of sheer grace to embrace me. If God has embraced me on those terms, who am I not to embrace God's world on the same terms? And so it's a fundamental reality that our theology is Christocentric, and if you follow Jesus around for a bit, you come to understand there were no outsiders. And that the path was the same for everyone in terms of a pursuit of a realization of God's life. And so the church is bigger than selling some sectarian game or point of view or even doctrine or theology. Several years ago at a community prayer breakfast, then Mayor Ron Kirk strode into the room. He was the keynote speaker of this prayer breakfast, and he had his Bible under his arm. I knew we were in for it with Ron Kirk carrying a Bible around. And he stood up at the pulpit, and his first line of the prayer breakfast was, "I'm sorry, but we've prayed long enough. It's time to get to work." And so sometimes we settle for orthodoxy because it's convenient and manageable. We can rail it in, we can understand it, we can write about it, we can reflect on it, we can proclaim it, but we do nothing, and therefore our orthodoxy means nothing. What we need is orthopraxy, a strong commitment to the pursuit of Jesus Christ in the world for the sake of God's people, no matter who they are, what they're dealing with, or what they've been through. Right? Now these are kind of my assumptions. I was talking to John Siburt, who is a phenomenal young leader. He spoke at Movement Day last week, and yesterday a city council member here in Dallas told me that he blew him away with what he said about the poor. One of the things John said about the poor at Movement Day was, if you don't like poor folks, don't mess with them. They got enough trouble without you coming doing your do-good deal, not liking them, sitting in judgment of them, trying to shape some kind of political reality around them. If you don't love people, stay away from them, because you're going to do more harm than good. Stay home, work, do your thing, and send money to people who do love people. Now, I'm being facetious and a little bit over the top there. And John probably did say it a lot kinder than I do. You'll know, because Sybert's a lot kinder than I am. But I haven't got much time left, right? So Sybert's got a long time. He's a great young leader that makes this interface between ACU and CitySquare really work. And I want to say just a word before we go further about how proud we are to be connected to Abilene Christian University. Because here's a university that is expressing the very values that I just tried to enunciate regarding ecumenical embrace, transformational ministry in the world, being willing to take risks against power to do more, to equip people for real servanthood and transformational faith. And so A lot of that I attribute to Dr. Money's leadership for so long as the president of the university. He navigated that school through all kinds of potentially treacherous water and shoals that were unseen until you were right on top of them, and he did it with grace and a great acumen. And I think the fact that we're all here today talking like this is a tribute to his work and to his leadership. And so we're really thrilled that ACU is on the second floor of our building, and the students are doing amazing things. We're going to talk about leveraging resources from the outside into a community in just a moment. But I'll tell you just one little snippet before I go forward with what I had planned. We've been delivering or providing after-school meals and summer lunches in Dallas and beyond for about 5 or 6 years now. Last summer, we served almost 1 million meals to school kids who were out of school for the summer break over a 9-week period. And we did that in Houston, Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, and we just started in Waco since the summer. That's been a phenomenal process, and to watch that happen has been very gratifying. Food on the Move is sort of half of that process, which instead of delivering meals to churches and boys and girls clubs and places like that where we do drop deliveries, we've been going into apartment complexes where there have been no programs for kids, just kids in apartment complexes, many of these children home alone during the summer months. And we've coupled the summer lunch delivery with our AmeriCorps team, over 300 AmeriCorps members last summer, many of whom teamed up with Food on the Move to go into these neglected places and have a 90-minute day camp every day for 9 weeks that focused on health and education, thinking about staying in school, the importance of education, and just understanding their role in the community. One of the challenges of the summer lunch program is keeping track of how the meals are delivered, where they're delivered, and how many you deliver. The Texas Department of Agriculture has a system that's based on tick sheets. So every time you serve a meal, you make a mark. And at the end of the day, Renee can tell you, you got a pile full of these mark sheets, and somebody's got to go in a dark room somewhere and count them all out and figure out how many meals you served, where you served them, and how to order the food for the next day, which of course simply guarantees waste. We had an IT student group at Abilene Christian University as their capstone project. They developed an app that we worked on a little bit ourselves and that we were able to put into the hands of our workers who had smartphones and iPads. And so when a meal was delivered, a note was made that was geo-stamped so we knew exactly where it was delivered, exactly when it was delivered, and that it was in fact delivered. At the end of the day, we just downloaded the information from the server and we had our order sheet for the next day. Virtually eliminated waste. Abilene Christian University students are doing pragmatic things like that with their skills to transform the world and to make it a better place now. You don't have to wait till you graduate to start that work of transformation. You can do it now. That's the whole point here of the contextual learning. So as I started thinking about this, and I was talking to John about it, I started to spend all my time reading the Bible to you. And then I thought better of that. I'm going to assume you guys have read the Bible. And I would argue that if you think about it for a minute, I bet because you read the Bible, at least in part, that's why you're here. Because the clear message of Scripture is we serve a God who is a God of compassion, justice, and intervention. We serve a God whose fundamental movement is down toward us, and a God who models for us exactly how to be in the world. And we could start in the Hebrew Bible and work our way through the law and the history of Israel and the prophets and the wisdom literature and the music, and we would see this unbelievable emphasis on compassion, on justice, on equity, and how that God expects God's people to live into that. And then when you open the pages of the New Testament, there's Jesus. And from the Magnificat in Luke 1 all the way to the end of Luke's writing, you have this emphasis in just virtually every other chapter that calls us to be concerned for the poor. It causes us to decide to spend our lives in pursuing those who are broken and lost and neglected and kicked to the margins and left out. You know, I grew up, like many of you, in a local church where we spent a lot of time in the book of James, because we figured in our noble war with the Baptists that we could debunk their faith-only business with the book of James. Imagine my chagrin when I read Martin Luther's comment, James, a right straw epistle. But James isn't a right straw epistle. But James is not what we thought it was either. James is an economic tract. It's a community organizing manual. It talks about wages and equity and fairness and class structure and hierarchy and power. It's not talking about baptism. It's talking about how the people of God order their lives to challenge a world that's not fair. And how the people of God bring dignity to those who are the poor. And how the people of God, to their own peril, exalt the wealthy and give them special place in all considerations when it comes to how the church functions. Am I getting close to your toes? That's the message of the Epistle of James. It's not right straw. It's flint hard and needs to be rediscovered by the people of God. When James recounts the inner workings of congregational life that allows some leader to point to a poor person and say, you sit over there. Not over here, over there. James models our culture today that screams to the poor, not here, over there. Not in this full-service hospital, not in that private bed, over there in the ER. Not here for a fine public education, over there in one of the schools we just have decided to neglect. I could go right down a whole litany of things. You know, not more wages for you, over there, where you got the minimum wage, and if you're undocumented, less than that. So, I'm assuming we understand the scriptural narrative that calls us to be concerned about these things. Now, I want to spend just a moment asking you why you came here today. And that may be related to something you're working on. Or it may be something completely different. Why'd you come? This is a real question.
I'm frustrated with just feeding people. I want to learn how to break the cycle of poverty.
Okay. So I hear you saying you came because you want to kind of move beyond charity to something more transformative. Terrific. Somebody else.
For us at High Point McKinney, we have phenomenal food pantry, clothes closet, outreach to the community, but I don't think we're bringing justice to the entire system of McKinney. I think we're just handing it down right now.
Terrific. Okay. I'm hearing a move toward a systemic change that actually benefits people and that is sustainable. Just because it's the way we do business. Yes, sir.
I work for a nonprofit that is really strong on relational dynamics, but has some difficulty in taking those relationships to a point where the relationships are changing things that are breaking those chains of inequality.
Okay. I really relate to that because I think the next step, if you're not intentional, you won't take the next step. And so you've got to be. So you're very thoughtful. You're perceiving something that's very important. Yes.
I have a frustration of trying to work in the homeless situation.
Right.
And in trying to find housing for
Yes.
young adults. If they don't have an alcohol or drug problem, then I can't find a place.
Right. Right. So there's a dearth of housing for homeless people who are either not incarcerated or have not been incarcerated or who have, some kind of co-occurring diagnosis or whatever, some kind of mental health or behavioral health issue. Yeah, we don't have enough housing in the city of Dallas for workforce folks, let alone homeless folks. And we were yesterday talking to one of our council members about that very matter, and we're trying to figure out how to kind of sneak up on the city. But I've learned the hard way about that. If you go frontal about that, if you just go right into somebody's face with that, they'll find 15 ways to knock you down real quick. So we got to come back. And before I came in here, I was looking at an article about Minnesota's permanent supportive housing strategy and the return on investment that comes to a community when they build housing and put people in that housing, either out of substandard housing, where, for example, asthma is rampant, to street to housing in terms of all that it costs. I'm going to say some more about that in a minute about one of our projects that we're working on. Yes, sir.
There are churches looking at new ways to carry the gospel to everyone in our community, not just those that find their way around.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. And, how many churches are interested in carrying the gospel to everybody in their community? Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think what you're going to find is not only will you carry your experience with the gospel, you'll encounter someone else's experience with the gospel, and in that magic interface, you'll have power. Let's relieve ourselves of this sort of burden of somehow convincing people to believe what we believe. Let's just go and love people and see what God does for both of us and for all of us.
I have two things. I'm tired. I'm tired of what we've always done. And being told, oh, well, that's those people.
Right.
Because I take groups of kids into the city. And I have a dream that's greater than my church.
Cool. That's awesome. Tired of doing it the same old way. Us, them. That's a dangerous dynamic, and heads in the wrong direction. Glad you're here. Yes.
I'm working on DACO Ministry project, and my emphasis on hospitality and justice. And hospitality is how we receive everyone as a child of God.
Right.
So that there are no, we should not have a sense of judgment or of privilege.
Right. Right. Yeah. Very good. How do we receive one another without this sense of privilege? And that's the burden, and that's the fundamental question for, I think, all of us. I spoke to a group at Messiah College last year, and here's a school that's rooted in the tradition of the Church of the Brethren. This is a peace movement school. This is a wildly evangelical justice-related school. And yet it's a school populated with kids of great privilege. And so my message was, what are you going to do with your privilege? What do you do with your privilege? You were born with it. It's like I used to tell my daughters, you were born on third. If life's a football game, you were born on the 5-yard line, your opponent's 5-yard line. And you're going to be surrounded by people as you go through life they weren't even born in the parking lot. Heck, they can't even see the stadium. They can't see the stadium lights when they're turned on. So you got 5 yards to go to be successful. Shame on you if you're not. But what are you going to do with your privilege? So there is that equity thing going on. Someone else. Yes. Right. Yeah. Let me affirm your cluelessness. When I came here in 1994, I didn't know what I was doing. Now I'm going to talk about today in just a minute, but in 94, I didn't know what I was doing. All I knew was I was telling my church I'm believing more and more these days in less and less. And that things are getting really clear to me about where the priorities should be. And I know what Jesus said about poverty, the poor, and those who are kicked to the side. So I saw this as an opportunity to get into that. With some fear and trepidation, I'll confess. But I didn't know what I was doing. And I still don't. If you've come here today because someone's left the impression with you that I'm the guru and I'm going to tell you what to do, we probably ought to break right now and go to a pub somewhere and get really down to it. Because I need to pick your brain. You know what I'm saying? I don't know what I'm doing yet. And I don't think I ever will. Because the wonder of creation is that God makes people that are going to eternally be unknowable, and yet God's placed within us this desire to know and to be known. I used to threaten to put a little asterisk by my name that would direct you down to a parenthetical statement at the bottom of the card or maybe on the back of the card. Beware, this man does not know what he's doing. And that's still true. So don't let ignorance stop you. You may feel like you don't know, but you're here, right? And that's key. We'll figure this out together. I'm going to refer to the corner, and you're going to see the corner after a while on the tour. We're building a building right across the street from this corner. And it's a big campus that's going to bring lots of resources to the neighborhood. And it's going to focus on employment, training, preparation, nutrition, and health. We go to this corner every Thursday and just hang out. And we do that because we don't feel comfortable invading somebody else's neighborhood where we have no friends, right? And so we go there. And I put that here because it's sort of, at this point in our journey, this is kind of the seminal symbol. Okay? So let's go to the sweet little girl. Now, what I want to do, and we see kids like this all the time, and I'm going to talk about kids like her as we go. But I want to just lay out some principles that lead, hopefully, toward best practices. So let's try to do that. First of all, and this is kind of the place where we start, we believe in the ability of people to solve their own problems when given access to opportunity and resources. People closest to a problem know most about it. Typically, we disbelieve in the ability of people who are troubled. We have no confidence, nor do we even think to consult the people closest to a problem. We think the poor are poor in every respect, and the rich are wealthy in every respect. That's a bad proposition. I've seen it over and over and over again. When given just the slightest opportunity and just the most meager resources, people who are dealing with poverty will figure things out. They're the most resourceful, unbelievably creative people because of their situation. Some of the most amazing people I've met had nothing. I'll give you a couple of stories. Years ago, we still have a thrift store that's actually does pretty good for us. But years ago, we had a clothing thing in the back, over on Haskell, and we'd drag that thing out every day. And there was a neighborhood woman who kind of ran the thing for us, and it was useful to people. One day, a woman came into our center, and she had an $80 light bill that she had to pay. And as fate would have it, we had no money. And the counselor, who was one of her neighbors, who also was, we don't use the word client, but someone who used our services in that building, was interviewing her. So she was actually talking to a peer from the community as she was being interviewed about her light bill. And this lady who worked for us as a volunteer said, I got an idea. You can buy all the clothes you can cram into a big black trash bag out back today for 25 cents. How much money do you have? And she had $3 or $4. So the counselor said, look, go out back, buy all the bags of clothes you can buy, 25 cents a bag, take them home, clean them up, and sell them. See how that works. Well, the woman didn't come back for 3 or 4 weeks. She came back 3 or 4 weeks later, And she proudly told the counselor, "Thanks for telling me that. I had a great yard sale, raised what I needed to pay my light bill, got a little left, come back to get some more clothes." Now, I know that illustration is fraught with all kinds of problems for people with middle-class sensibilities. How dare you sell the clothes I gave you when I cleaned out my closet? My attitude would be, how dare you not? You're done with it. You're giving it to us. We're giving it to them. They're resourceful and creative, and they paid the light bill. That's just one little example of all the things we've experienced over the years. You give low-income people a shot that's real, resources that really make a difference, and opportunities that come with that, and they have a way of solving their own problems. One of the things I say to myself over and over and over again, and I really have virtually disabused myself of this notion that people need me. People do not need me. I know this is going to come as a big surprise to you. People don't need you. I know the mic's gone, but I'll yell. I don't know what happened. Now we need each other in the brother-sisterhood kind of thing. We do need human connection. We need friendships. We need all those kinds of community things. We need that. But people don't really need me to do better. They can do better on their own if they've got what they need to do better. And I love to feel needed. But that's really not what we're talking about here. We're talking about sharing power and opportunity and resources. Okay, let's go to the next one. We believe the resources within a community, you name the community. You think of a community that you are concerned about or you're working with. We believe that the resources within a community are adequate to initiate genuine renewal and redevelopment. Now, there's going to have to be leveraging of other resources from the outside in to be transformative completely. But in terms of initiation, if you don't engage the resources that are already in the community, what you end up with is not going to be what you want. From a sustainability standpoint, from a personal transformation standpoint, and from the standpoint of creating more and more dependence upon people who have power you may not have. We can initiate genuine renewal and redevelopment from the resources that are within a community. How many of you have read my book? Okay. This will be a little redundant for some of you, but I'm going to tell you the most important thing that ever happened to me the first year I was here. The first year I was here, as I told you, I didn't really know what I was doing. We had this food pantry. We had a small life skills training program that really wasn't all that effective. I don't know what I'm doing. We had a life skills training program that was embryonic. We had a MASH medicine clinic that was 3 hours a week on Thursday nights. 2 great docs and a great dentist would show up every Thursday night no matter what, and they would see people who were lined up down the sidewalk for 3 hours. They were there. They saw everything they saw a lot of toenail fungus, and they saw some colon cancer. And toenail fungus was manageable. Colon cancer presented quite a challenge, especially for uninsured people. That's where we were. And so one day, I'm interviewing these 3 Hispanic women, all together. Now I understand that from a professional social work standpoint, that's not what you typically would do, right? Although I'm hearing that doctors are doing group medical consults, so I don't know. But I'd never had a social work class and didn't know what I was doing, but these 3 women were pooling their limited English to overcome my abject stupidity because I can't speak Spanish. And we weren't getting very far. These women were perfect strangers to one another. They didn't know each other. Their children were all beautiful and having fun with each other. And a woman that I'd already interviewed who had gone back to the grocery store to get her groceries, Josefina Ortiz, 62-year-old grandmom, came walking by where I was to leave with her groceries in tow, and I reached out to her. And I said, will you help me? And she said, well, of course. What do you need? And I said, I need someone to translate this interview. So Josephina set her groceries down. She sat down, and she didn't translate the interview. She conducted it. She'd been there before. She knew the ropes. She knew what was going on. And she turned to me and she said, you know, we need this, this, and this. Can we provide it? And of course we provided it. And we had a great interchange through this translator. And these women were now getting to know each other as they left the building. And their kids were still kind of orbiting around them. It was delightful to watch. And of course I'm on my knees thanking Miss Ortiz profusely for her help. I don't like to feel stupid. So when I find somebody who saves me from that, I tend to want to thank them. So I'm thanking her. And she is leaving the building, but she has the good sense to turn back to me before she leaves, and she says, you know, Larry, I could come back tomorrow and help you because I have time. Now, what I didn't tell you about this center was when I got here, I had 15 to 20 older, white, crispy critter, burned out, kind of negative attitude type church people from suburban churches. And they were in the city, by gum, doing their duty to God and country. But they were a little worn out. Now the canned corn was straight. By the way, I can tell you how effective you are in a community by looking at how you stack your corn. I would suggest that if you go home tonight and your corn is very, very straight, mess it up. Our corn was stacked straight. But we weren't making any inroads into the community. I remember buying a coffee pot, putting it in the interview room, and one of the longtime volunteers came over to me and said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm making coffee. I love coffee. I know our guests love coffee. We can sit down and visit, maybe figure out what's going on with them, establish some relationships. And this longtime volunteer said, don't you know that if you give these people coffee, they'll never leave? I told my wife that night that I thought we were probably about a half a bubble off plumb. We didn't know exactly where we were headed. Later, just a few days later, a guy who looked just like Willie Nelson walked in, creviced face, long, braided, gray hair. I swore it was Willie. He leaned over the welcome desk where the matriarch of the founding congregation had been assigned. I don't know how that ever happened. And he leans over to sign in, and she spots a pack of Camels in his shirt pocket, and she says, and I heard her, you know, if you wouldn't use your money on those nasty old cigarettes, you wouldn't have to come in here and take our food out. We fired her. It took a meeting of the Sanhedrin. But we fired her. So that's the backdrop. And in walks Josephina into my life, and she says, you know, Larry, I can come back tomorrow and help you just like this. Well, she came back tomorrow and helped me for 9 years. But what Josephina really did was she brought a message from God. And the message was, A, Larry, you don't know what this community needs. You just can't possibly know. And when you go to considering need, you always define the need in terms of material things. And that's not any way for you to look at anything for which I am responsible, God says. That afternoon, after Josephina left, after the day was over, I went upstairs to my office, looked out a big plate glass window onto the street, and there were people everywhere. People coming and going. Crack house across the street, crack cocaine campground behind our building. People everywhere, time on their hands, bewilderment in their lives. Nothing really to do productive except try to get out of the way of the drug dealers and get home. Or maybe make a deal. We changed our culture in 45 days, 60 at the outside, after the Josephina experience. I got all the volunteers together and I said, it's a new day in Israel. We're going to do things differently. And one of the things we're going to do is we're going to add a question at the bottom of our intake sheet that says, could you come back and help us? So that everyone who came in would be asked what Josephina had been asked, can you help me? Now, it's a very important thing for caregivers like you, compassionate people like you, people with power, privilege, and opportunity like you, to learn to ask people with nothing for help, out of a genuine recognition that you don't have what you need. Because the poor, quote unquote, are rich. They're rich in social capital. They're rich in intellectual capital. They're rich in understanding what's going on in the community. They may not have two nickels to rub together in terms of material wealth, but they have what we need to be transformative. And so we retrained everyone, and guess what? We went from having 15 to 20 older, suburban, burned out white folks to having about 300 volunteers every month from the neighborhood. It was unbelievable. It was chaos. The founder of our organization 25 years ago, Jim Sal, came by one day and he said, man, you got the lunatics running the asylum. And he was that was a compliment. He was he'd never seen anything like it. One of the things that I heard over and over and over again as we tried to implement this, as we tried to marshal these initial resources that we found around us, people said to me over and over and over again, these people are going to steal you blind. You're naive, you're crazy. And finally, I said, you know what, you're right. I've noticed there's some theft in this business. But I've noticed it's one of two kinds. Canned corn out the back door, yeah, or human dignity at the front door. I'm going to go with a canned corn cartel. I have every confidence I can straighten those boys out. I understand them. They don't have any jobs. They don't have any money. They're trying to scratch out a living. There's no open doors. What do you expect? But the human dignity pirates are no longer welcome here. They will not be accepted no matter what it costs. Well, now what happened was the emergence of a 24/7 think tank that was already resident in the community. We didn't go get any experts. We read a lot of stuff and we went places. But here was the base of our renewal. And it's still largely that way today. The way we do things is a little different. We're a lot bigger and we're more quote-unquote sophisticated and complicated. But this is the kind of the seminal value that we believe redevelopment can begin from within the community with the resources that are already resident there. And that if you don't mobilize those resident resources, you're going to go down a path that's not going to be satisfying in terms of outcome, nor sustainability. If whatever your project is, or whatever your life position is, or whatever your church's posture is, if you don't root yourselves in the resources and the rich soil of the community that God created, you're not going to have what you want. You're just not. Let's see what the next one is. So, and this goes back to the Josephina story, we devote ourselves to the discovery and mobilization of individual and community resources and capacities in the context of engagement. It's a most unbelievable thing. We go to the corner on Thursdays because we want to hang out with people. We don't want to invade a neighborhood, as I said earlier, without knowing people. And we sometimes bring meals and we bring water and we bring coffee. We bring something just to bring people some relief from the last 2 weeks has been the fierce cold. And we just sit there and we just talk and we just visit. But really, we're coming to receive as much or more than we're coming to give. Because we're trying to engage this context and we're trying to understand what's here. And it's amazing to watch, mainly guys on this corner, women too, but mainly guys, homeless guys, as they make their way from under the overpasses downtown back over to one shelter, or as they make their way from the underpasses back to where they're going to spend the night. These guys will just immediately engage in whatever's going on. They want to do something. They want to make a contribution. It is the nature of humanity to want to give. You know, Jesus said, according to Paul, it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. If that's true, the highest good is to put a person in a position to give. It's not to put our people in positions to give. It's to put those we quote-unquote serve in a position to exercise their abilities and their resources, to take them seriously and to engage them. And if you're not planning for that, if you're not plowing that dynamic into the heart of your people, it's not going to be pretty and it won't be long-lasting. Let's see the next one. I can't tell you how important this is to us from a practical standpoint. We believe in partnerships and collaboration, and therefore we hold all the resources at our disposal with an open hand. You cannot do substantive community redevelopment alone. You cannot do it alone. You don't know enough, you don't have enough, you can't see enough. The scope of your influence is not large enough, and the scale is enormous. We have an enormous poverty problem in this country. Enormous. And Dallas is the richest poor city in the world. And it's like two planets. The people with wealth and middle class comfort know nothing about the people who have nothing. And the people who have nothing, that's a growing demographic. It's a fearsome reality. It is unsustainable, socially, politically, and spiritually. And if we don't wake up to the beloved community and the needs of the beloved community, if we don't begin to see ourselves as part of something larger than just our little table at night, we're going to lose everything. We're going to lose everything. Just read some history. And I'm not trying to be alarmist, but we've got to come together as a people and ask for something better. Our kids have got to be better educated. Our people have got to be housed. We've got to have jobs that work, produce something, and we've got to hold leaders accountable to produce all that. We've got to care for each other when we're sick. We've got to take care of each other when we grow old. We've got to champion each other when we're successful. And we've got to come to know each other across lines we've created to our own demise. It's just real simple. You can't do that without partnerships. We will talk to anybody if the agenda seems to be community renewal, redevelopment, justice, and fighting poverty. Anybody. We don't care who gets the credit. We don't want it. We just want to see people have a fair shot at the abundant life. I'm not talking about extravagance. I'm talking about the abundant life that comes from just feeding your family and having a home and pursuing what your dreams are. So we've got all kinds of partnerships. I think in my book there's a whole section where it's just partnerships. Baylor Healthcare System, City of Dallas City Council. John was at Commissioner's Court this morning arguing about living wage jobs at the county level. AmeriCorps has been an incredible partner. And it's a public entity. And it's just amazing what AmeriCorps allows us to do in terms of not only community engagement and community development and community service, but also human development. All these young people mostly young people, who are signed on to AmeriCorps are growing dramatically in their own personal walk, their own professional development. Abilene Christian University, my goodness, there couldn't be a better partner in terms of, and we've already talked about what these young people are already doing to be transformative in the world. But those are just two examples. I've got to leave here while you guys are having lunch and go across the street to Chase Bank, where we're going to sit down with 11 other people and talk about Chase Bank's community development work globally. I have no idea where that's going. I'm just going. And just a pragmatic note on this, how many of y'all like meetings? Will anybody in here admit to liking meetings? I hate meetings. But that's all I do, is meet. John the other day, he said, you know, Larry, this is the third meeting this week that you set up that you had no idea what it was about. I said, that's right. That's how we roll. I can't keep track of all of it. But if you want to meet, I'll be there. There are no bad meetings. They're terrible, They're a burden, they're a challenge, they drive you crazy, but there are no bad meetings. You know why? It takes people to meet. And you can't have partnerships unless you're willing to be with people. Now, here's another thing. You can't have partnerships unless you're like this. Not gimme, but it flows through our hands. One of the classic examples is 12 years ago, Human Resource and Services Administration, HRSA, came up with a grant, a federal grant for community access programs in America. And community access programs were the precursors to what you're seeing now with health navigators. And so our little development department wrote a grant to HRSA for $750,000 to get a community access program to Dallas. In writing that grant, we named the beneficiary, the grantee, as the Dallas Academy of Medicine. They didn't have a development department. We had a development department. We knew that if we got this grant, we'd be able to do a community access program that would broadly expand our referral resources out of our health clinic, so that when you come in with something beyond toenail fungus and you needed a specialist, we could refer to a group of specialists who would take care of you, right? So we wrote that grant thinking that way. But they got all the money. And guess what happens when they get all the money? You have no control. Give up on control. You can't control the kingdom of God. And if you can control something you're worried about controlling, it's not big enough or significant enough for you to waste your time on. Just don't sweat control. I mean, you're going to go to bed at night and get a good night's sleep, hopefully. Get up the next morning and try it again. You don't have to control. Just connect. We've done that over and over and over again, and we will continue to do that. Partnerships are the key. Now, in churches, those will be a little challenging sometimes, depending on who your partners are. But I believe that one of the best ways to have ecumenical harmony and make real progress along those lines is to be engaged together as churches across denominational lines. Well, you know, like we are here today. I could have put this one first. We believe racial reconciliation is a prerequisite for genuine community renewal. Race is a problem in America. We now have the slippery reality of class. That's not really new, but when someone wants to start talking about race, we can default to class and never talk about race. I love Cornel West's book, Race Matters. And really what he means by that is, sure, race does matter, but he's talking about matters of race. We've got to extend ourselves. We've got to take risk around this. But you can't do community redevelopment in the inner cities of America and be a racist. I'll take it a step further. You can't do that in the inner cities of America and not admit to your challenge about being a racist if you're white. Further, unless you analyze your privilege based on your accident of birth and how you use that privilege as a white person, you can't do this. We've got to get honest about race, and we've got to be humble enough and submissive enough to let our brothers and sisters of color tell us the truth. And that gets down to real basic stuff. And there is a resistance among young people to go this way. Probably because they didn't live through some of the same history some of the rest of us did. But years ago I had this little message service. I did a fax every day or every week that I would send. I called it Encouraging Facts. And one day I wrote a little essay about Crayola. When I was a kid, I wanted a 72 count box of Crayolas. And I never could get it because we were too poor, right? But I had this vision of this Crayola box. And so, I was 45 years old. I went down to wherever it was, and I bought me a big old box of Crayolas. I got the biggest one they could make. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but that's one of my lifelong ambitions, was to have all the colors. You know what they used to call peach in the Crayola box? Flesh. Think about that. Really? Peach is flesh? There's so many insidious ways that racism is tucked away into the fabric of our culture that it just jumps up at us and pops us, no matter how good-hearted we may think we are. White privilege is an issue. Learning to relinquish control to people of color with all the power is an exercise we must engage if you want this to happen, if you really want community renewal to take place. And it's a challenge. It's not easy. It'll make everybody uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, in relationship after relationship, it'll also be incredibly rewarding, because we do need to hear from each other. And the rich wealth of the ethnicity of this nation could be the solution to a lot of the problems we face today, if we could just face our challenges honestly and go to work. Okay. We believe that our walk with God will always lead us into the community around us. I bet there's not a person in the room that disagrees with that. I mean, to walk with God is to move into the community. I mean, unless you're a monk. And even the monastic life was based on a community experience. I mean, I don't know what it means to love God if I can't touch you. How do I do that? I mean, I'm not smart enough to get that ethereal. But if I find God in you, I certainly encounter God in community. You know, I'm back to the corner. Texas Instruments, another one of our partners, came out one Thursday and decided to throw a big barbecue. And so they brought this gigantic barbecue pit out there, and we positioned it on the service station parking lot next door. And by the way, that service station, when you see it, it's been in operation continually by the same family since it was built in 1950. The Marandino brothers are an institution in that community. Anyway, we staged the cookout, and so we were all out there, and we were talking to the folks that live out on the street. We were talking to the TI people, and something just told me to go to my car and get the football that's in my car for my grandson. If you're the grandfather of Wyatt Toombs, you have to carry a football at all times. So I had a football in my back. So I just started playing catch with a homeless guy, my friend Blue, and I just started playing catch. And it was the beatingest thing. Within about 5 or 10 minutes, a football game broke out. All these guys, homeless guys, playing like 10-year-old kids. And it was about the same time that I began to recognize the incredible importance of being able to touch a guy or a gal. That we're dealing with a population that are literally untouchable. And the response from people just at my touch was unbelievable. It was like a countenance change. It was like a spirit of thanksgiving. It was like, hope to see you again soon. It was like friendship, right? It was just powerful, the touch. And then it occurred to me that playing and touching affirms the creation that we all enjoy at the hands of a God who's made us all the same at some level. And we're so busy trying to serve and fix and solve, we don't ever enjoy the new kind of life that can proceed from the development of a different community. I haven't quite figured it out yet, but I ordered a table yesterday, or the day before yesterday. I'm I'm going to put a cardboard sign like you see on the corner that says Lord's Supper. And after people have a chance to eat, I'm going to offer them the Eucharist on that corner as an expression of God's radical acceptance of them. Because if my touch and my football can enliven a group of hopeless people like that, what can a reminder of God's love do, right? Now, I'm not suggesting you all go back and do that where you are. I'm just suggesting there's something like that where you are that can be discovered if your walk with God corresponds with movement into the community. Let's see what's next. Okay, this is my friend Blue. We accept people where we find them, and as friendships develop, we work to engage human potential with new opportunity. This is so important. Learning how to and teaching others around you to simply accept people where we find them and not rush in with an agenda to change everything up. That's so important. Now, I met Blue on the corner months ago. Blue is a chronic inebriate with theological tendencies. One day I'm out there and Blue's sitting on the steps on the sidewalk, and I know he's reading a book. He's over on the other end of the sidewalk, kind of away from everybody. He's reading this book, and so I'm thinking, well, Blue's reading a book, and so I go down and sit down by Blue, and I said, what are you reading? He said, well, I'm reading Thoughts in Solitude by Thomas Merton. Okay? How many of your people at church read Thoughts in Solitude by Thomas Merton? And he said, I'm reflecting on what it is, this solitude that I have. Yeah, I want to be with that guy. I would really love to facilitate him addressing his chronic inebriation. He tells me he'd like for that to happen too. We'll see. But Blue is amazingly valuable. He sleeps on the driveway of the Marandino service station. He is a night watchman for the station. He's a gatekeeper in the community, and he reads Merton. Blue's a mystic. There are so many undiscovered Blues in your world. As a matter of fact, I think I can make the case that virtually everybody in your world, on their own terms, in their own way, is like him. There's some untapped, unrecognized, unheralded beauty, power, and truth that I need. I have people all the time. We take people on tours, especially church people, and we go, the medical clinic, we go to the law firm, we go to the housing developments, we go to the workforce training piece, we go to the food pantry, we talk about summer lunches, we talk about AmeriCorps, we talk about all the stuff we're doing, and then someone says, well, where does the ministry take place? Well, the ministry takes place when I get to sit at Blue's feet and listen. Yeah. That's where the ministry takes place. So, in fact, poor folks will impose faith upon you, whether you want to talk about it or not. That's the way I've seen it flow. Talking about partnerships, and I always get this question when we talk about especially public partnerships with funding involved. They want to know if we're limited in any way by taking public dollars, and we really aren't, because we wouldn't make our help, quote unquote, conditional upon any profession of faith or any kind of religious activity anyway. It's just not who we've ever been, nor will we ever be. In the first year or two that I was at what was then Central Dallas Ministries, we were all circled up in the food pantry, as the custom is in the morning, holding hands and praying. And in walked monitors from AmeriCorps, both state and national. And here we are praying, black, white, and brown, holding hands, praying for the day. And after the prayer was over, the monitor from D.C. came to me and she said, "Can I talk to you about that?" And I thought, uh-oh, we're in trouble now. And we went back into a private room where we could visit for a moment, and she said, "That's the most amazing thing I've seen in a while, to see a community so united. Can you teach us how to do that? Can you teach us how to teach that?" Or that's like a HUD conference in Houston several years ago. I'd been invited to make the luncheon speech and also do a breakout session in the morning, and it was the Department of Housing and Urban Development was having a faith-based conference on how faith-based organizations get involved in serving HUD properties and other kinds of programs. And there was a lady there from Dallas, from the Dallas Housing Authority, and she stood up in the breakout and she said, "We want all of you faith-based organizations to come bring your faith to the inner city and work on our properties." And so we went to the luncheon. Before I spoke, one of the banks, Bank of America or Chase, gave a $100,000 check to one of the community development corporations in Houston. And so my obvious first line in the speech was simply, "It's a new day in America when HUD calls a prayer meeting and Chase Bank gives away $100,000 to low-income housing developers." But you're going to find that. You're going to find that to be the case. And everywhere there's opportunity, if we're just willing to engage. Let's see the next one. This is a touchy one. I'll just be quick here. We really believe that re-neighboring will be an important part of community development and renewal. And as a result of that, a number of us associated with this work will always be living in the inner city. I think it's very difficult to do work in a sustainable manner without someone living there in the middle of it. That doesn't mean everybody. This is not a call to everybody move to the inner city. You know, if I remember correctly, when Nehemiah rebuilt the walls, they cast lots as to who would live in the city and who would live out, and they took 1 of 10 to live in the city. And the rest of them lived in the countryside and raised sheep and whatever else and supported the folks who live in the city, maybe, I don't know. But re-neighboring's got to be there because it's kind of an incarnational kind of reality. I don't think you can really understand completely a neighborhood. You can't understand it completely anyway, but you can't understand as much as you probably need to if you're not there. Just something to ponder. And the classic questions are always, what about public schools? What about my kids? What about safety? All those things. And everybody has to work that out on their own. But I will say, as a general rule, my belief is education has more to do with parents than the ISD you're a part of. And safety is a matter of just blind chance. You know, 5 or 6 years after I moved to the inner city, there were 2 kids shot and killed on the parking lot of Berkner High School after a football game in Richardson. I mean, you know, who knows? That just happens. So something to consider. This goes back to some of the things you guys were saying earlier. We believe charity must be replaced by compassionate community building as a basic strategy. This is Congo Street. Congo Street is a historic African American street in East Dallas, right on the boundary of East Dallas and far East Dallas. We worked with the Jubilee Center for years. We had some of their people on our payroll as they got started. These homes were occupied by people who lived there for 30 or 40 years, and they were in terrible, terrible disrepair. So we entered into a partnership with BC Community Workshop, a group of progressive urban planner architects, and our AmeriCorps team, and we built a holding house where families could move into while we redid their home the way they wanted it. And so, you know, it was a very comprehensive thing, but it was way beyond charity because these people had sweat equity in the deal, like Habitat, and they had a lot of intellectual capital in the deal because they were planning the way their house would be. And some of the space designs inside these little bungalows that BC Workshop came up with were phenomenal. They magnified the effect of the space available many times over, using pocket doors and movable walls, all kinds of creative stuff. And the people who moved back into their homes that they owned were now very stable in the community, and that's one of the models I think that we need to pursue more of. Let's hit the next one. We believe for community to thrive, the institutions that make genuine community possible must be renewed, including the primary foreground institutions of home, school, and communities of faith. That's a long-winded explanation for this old logo we used to use. If you look at the background institutions, those represent government, finance, education, higher education, marketplace opportunities. But the foreground institution of home, church, faith community, and school remain very primary. And for years, we've moved in and out of these foreground institutions, and we've tried to knit them together with the background institutions to create this comprehensive community strategy. That's what we're going for. And it's not science, it's art, and it's hit and miss, and it's start and stop, and it's a little progress and some regress, and it's just a matter of staying after it. Let's see what's that. We believe the public, private, faith, and community-based organizations of a city must all play important roles in community development. So you got to go to City Hall. One thing I'll tell you about political people, there's no reason to be afraid of them. They work for you. Get to know them. It's all about relationships. Go to your city hall. Find out what the city's consolidated plan is. Find out what your city thinks about housing. Find out what your city thinks about poverty. Get in there and mix it up. Don't take no for an answer. Be persistent. Stay at it. You'll have results. I just had to throw in Cory Booker. Now Senator Cory Booker spoke at our prayer breakfast last year, and he was amazing. I mean, he stood up there for 45 minutes without a note and just told the story of his life and how it affected his vision for New Jersey and for Newark. But the public-private piece has got to be there. The faith-based piece has got to be there. But again, the scale of the problems are too large for us to do it on our own. We believe it's better to teach a man to fish rather than to give him a fish, but best of all is pond ownership. Trying to move along that continuum away from charity to equipping people for work or for fishing, whatever their fishing might be, but we're also trying to get people to own something in the community. This picture is of our landscape crew. When you go to the Opportunity Center today, you'll see the courtyard and you'll see all the shrubbery and stuff. These folks were hired off the corner, and they put in the landscape in the courtyard. And they now have formed a landscape crew. Now let me just inject here. Everything won't be successful. We had a landscape crew back in 1997, 98 called Yardscape. I was so proud of that landscape crew. And I found out something about plant material. There's enormous markup on plant material. And so we had all these accounts with churches and businesses and homes. And we had these guys going out every day, and we were mowing grass, and we were planting plants during the off season. We were doing all this stuff, and we were making money. But what I realized was, in order to service those contracts, we had failed to plow training and resources and opportunity into the people who were our crews. And so when they didn't show up, we just had to grab whoever and put them back out there doing the work. So we created a day labor situation. And a lot of the guys who were working for us were strung out on drugs and were using their money for drugs, and that wasn't really working very well. Kind of the crescendo of the crisis came one Friday afternoon when I got a call from our bank. Mr. James, I don't mean to upset you, but I think your landscape crew is selling marijuana to your youth workers out the back of their truck in our parking lot. So we were paying youth to do day camps for us. And they were down at the bank buying grass from the grass guys. Literally. That was not a good afternoon for me. And the following Monday morning, I called the guy who was kind of heading up our yard team, and I said, Terry, call all the people we have contracts with. We're getting out of this business. He said, are you crazy? Have you looked at the books? I said, yeah, I know. We're making money, but we're way off mission. We're, not only are we way off mission for the landscape people, we're way off mission for the youth we're trying to develop. So you're going to make colossal mistakes if you're trying stuff big enough. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. I tell people here all the time, if you're not making a mistake, you're not trying hard enough. If things aren't failing, you aren't thinking big enough. So don't be afraid of failure or being turned back. It's just going to happen. These guys have a stake in the community, and we're proud of them. This is the last one. We believe in the value of both chaos and ownership. Chaos allows room for lively faith. Ownership brings the correct players together to effect change in a community. Jackie Robinson and Branch Rickey changed the world. And it was a chaotic time for both of them, but they owned it, and everything changed. We got to get to that point. Back to the canned corn. It doesn't matter if it's not all that straight. It doesn't matter if the place feels chaotic. As a matter of fact, if it doesn't, you're probably not going in the right direction, because community is messy, people are messy, failure is messy, redemption is messy, incarnation is messy, and moving with your faith into the world is just messy. Now let me say just a word about our values. I think that's where we're headed next. Go ahead and just click them all up there. You know, our mission is real simple. We battle the causes and the effects of poverty through service, advocacy, and friendship. That's what we do. We battle the causes and effects of poverty through service, advocacy, and friendship. We do a lot of direct service. John was down this morning doing advocacy for some underpaid county workers. We'll continue to do that. But we're learning to major on friendship, because that's what people need, and that's what really develops community. These are our core values. We are people of faith. That's always been true of this organization. When we changed our name, it was not to move away from a statement of faith. We changed our name because people didn't ask the right questions about it. They thought they knew what it meant. But when you say CitySquare, they always ask, what does that mean? And we're able to tell them a vision for a community that's porous and open and innovative and relevant. But we are a community of faith, and we are a community. We're big on community. Everything we do is about that. We think about that all the time. We try to screen everything through that grid. We're about justice. I mean, unless we make things more equitable, unless we level the playing field, unless we give people a fair shot, that's really what people need. People don't need me. They need a chance. They need a mulligan. They need an opportunity. And so that's all about our work of justice. We worked really hard on payday lending legislation that now has been adopted by cities across Texas, representing almost 7 million Texans. We're going to continue to work on payday lending and other issues as well. And we're all about stewardship. We try to manage the most impact out of every dollar in this place, and we try our very best to be totally accountable, totally transparent. And one of the things that happens when you do public money, you get all kinds of auditors who become your friends, or maybe not so much. But everyone's looking, and that's good. And we try to do the very best we can with every penny we have. Go to the next slide, the last one. I want to just close by giving you kind of our theological frame. And I could have chosen a number of texts, but this is one that's increasingly important to me. You remember the story, John sends his disciples to ask Jesus, "Are you the guy?" And Jesus' answer is here, Luke 7. "Go and tell John what you have seen," and literally the text says, what you have seen and what you have heard about what you've seen. "The blind receive their sight. The lame walk. The lepers are cleansed. The deaf hear. The dead are raised. The poor have good news brought to them." And here's the kicker. "Blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." The implication is, if you work on this mission, you're going to offend people. people are going to stumble at your mission because you're spending your time on these kinds of people, problems, issues, and realities. These kinds of results. These kinds of outcomes. If you spend your life and your church spends its life focused on this, you will be, by definition, offensive. Blessed is the person who takes no offense at us when we do this work. And I would argue that we are increasingly surrounded by people in this country who take great offense at these concerns. And so we just need to kind of understand the frame and understand what that means for us and our work. It's probably accounting the cost and getting some agreements up front so you can move forward to pursue the same mission. I want to pursue that mission. If that was his mission, I want it to be my mission.